This touches a favorite topic of mine, and if you'll bear with me, I've got some things I'd like to say. It seems to me education is a perennial topic of reform. Through my lifetime and the lifetime of, I guess, everybody here, there have been 3 or 4 major reforms in Georgia. If you look back at those reforms, they were basically funding reforms. They had to do with where the money came from and what it was spent, or at least where it was spent. But there really has not been the kind of massive rethink that I was talking about a minute ago of the substance of how we educate and train our people. And more, we're not talking about just young people. More and more, we're talking about people in middle life who become victims of what we call structural unemployment. Foreign competition or technology suddenly puts a middle-aged person out of work. A person who is skilled, strong work ethic, got a mortgage, got kids in school with braces, suddenly that person is unemployed, and we don't have much in this country in the way of educational and training systems to deal with those kinds of people who are successful but who need some immediate training. But as far as young people, the topic of young people is concerned, I think what we have to realize is this, and my numbers may be slightly different from yours, but the message is the same. About 1/3 of the kids in this country don't finish high school. 1/3 finish high school and don't go any farther. About 1/3 go to college, and of that third, 2/3 drop out. So approximately 10% of the little 5-year-olds who line up to go to first grade actually complete college. Now, those numbers may be subject to variation depending on who you're talking to, but those are roughly the numbers. The problem with that, it seems to me, is this. Somewhere in our past, and I believe it must have been with the GI Bill after the Second World War, we made a golden calf out of a 4-year baccalaureate degree, and our entire educational system is geared to sending kids to college. Although we empirically know that 90% are either not going to go or not going to finish college. And we're planning against a planning scenario that is 90% inaccurate. We need to fundamentally rethink that. We need to think about, as the questioner suggested, preparing kids early in their career, even as early as grammar school, about the world of work, how you behave in the workplace. I think we ought to teach work ethics as a subject, as a topic in the schools. Numbers of employers, and this is anecdotal, I don't have any statistics to back this up, but I can't remember how many employers have said to me, gee, I interviewed this kid right out of high school, he looked good, I hired him, and he never came back from lunch. Or I tried to teach him how to do this job, and he got mad. He didn't know how to take instruction. Or I tried to correct him, and he flew off the handle and left. And it seems to me that somewhere we have lost we have forgotten that work ethic is a learned behavior. It has to be taught. And I think, frankly, it ought to be taught in the schools as a subject. And we need to rethink the content matter of what we teach, and with the idea that not all of the kids are going to go to college. Many of them are going to be and need to be and ought to be and will be very successful at all kinds of technical jobs, making good, substantial salaries. We ought not to have geared our entire educational system to something that is simply 90% inaccurate. That's part of the big rethink that I think we're in the middle of, and I think it's probably going to go on for another 2 or 3 years before we get to where we need to be. First, let me talk briefly about the idea of vouchers. I don't know everything about the President's suggestion that I think I perhaps should be. I don't think it's going to pass as a practical matter. I am not completely sold on the idea of vouchers, particularly with the training programs structured as they are now. There's an underlying welfare mentality underlying a lot of our training programs. They are aimed at people by statutory definition who are disadvantaged or underprivileged, who have a history of something less than complete success. And it seems to me that giving a voucher to someone who by definition has not been a success so far, simply giving them money or the equivalent of money and say, go and do well, is not a sensible approach. As long as training programs are focused on a disadvantaged group of people who have who by definition have a history of something less than success, I don't think you can simply say, well, here's money, go make a success of yourself. Now, having said that, let me add one final footnote, which I implied a minute ago, and that is, I think we need to take that welfare mentality out of the training process. I think we need to realize that there are young people who are perfectly capable, who are intelligent and energetic, and we need to realize that there are lots of successful middle-aged people who are intelligent and energetic and successful, who at some point in their life, because of the changing nature of the world of work, are going to need further education and training. We need to recognize that as a national priority, as a national issue, and make those kinds of systems available. If you're talking about a middle-aged person who's been successful his whole life, and you say, okay, here's a voucher, that may make some sense, but not a teenager who's got children. With respect to the question of the Georgia Trust, this has been the topic of a fair amount of discussion lately. Our trust is $1.42 billion as we speak. The question is that solvent? There are two or three ways to look at solvency. The most reliable way to look at solvency is to look at what is called the reserve ratio. And the reserve ratio is a snapshot comparison of the balance in the trust versus the risk that it is there to cover. And you measure the risk by the total amount of covered wages paid in the state in the previous 12 months. That is the analytical approach that is used by 53 of 53 jurisdictions. It is the analytical approach that we have always used in Georgia. It makes sense from an economic as well as a mathematical standpoint. Our reserve ratio now is 2.15. That is in my opinion, that represents solvency. It does not represent more than solvency. If anything, it would be nearer the lower edge of the spectrum of what most of us would call solvency. The rhetoric that has been thrown around about benefits to pay, enough money to pay benefits for 5 years is true if you assume benefits at the current level. You don't assume benefits at the current level. If the economy turns down, you don't pay benefits at the level that you were paying when the economy was good. If the economy turns down anywhere like it did in the mid-'70s or even in the early '90s, we have something closer to 1 year of benefits. If you compare it to the '70s, to the recession of the '70s, we actually have slightly less than 1 year. If you look at the '90s, we have something over a year. In my opinion, that does not represent an excess of funds. It represents solvency, but it does not represent an excess of funds. There have been a number of people who have just become totally fixated on the amount of money, the absolute dollars, and can't seem to get over the fact that the bigger the dollar, the bigger the risk, the more dollars you have to cover it. And people who say, well, gosh, $1.5 billion, let's just pour it out on the street and, let everybody have some of it. Very, very short-sighted thinking. In any case, I have been negotiating with folks in the General Assembly. By the way, 2 years ago, I recommended and pushed through the General Assembly against substantial opposition from the business community. The first tax cut ever in the history of the Georgia Unemployment Insurance Program. It was created in 1935, and there had never been a tax cut. I asked for, and the General Assembly agreed to, a 6% cut through the board. That represents about $22 million. This year, the topic came up again, and I have recommended to the General Assembly an additional tax cut on the order of 13%, over and above the 6 That will represent approximately $63 million. We can afford that. After that tax cut, we will still be solvent. Our fund will continue to grow modestly, as it should, because our economy is growing, and as long as the economy grows, your fund has to grow with it to cover the cost when the economy turns down. So that bill has passed out of the House committee where it began. It has not been considered by the House yet, but I'm confident that it will pass, and it will pass in the Senate.